Pay close attention to what I am about to reveal, and put aside any distractions competing for your time right now. What you are about to hear in this document is not a theoretical essay, it is not cheap speculation, and it is definitely not one of those fleeting alarmist headlines. We are documenting in real time a tectonic and structural failure in the global financial architecture, something that the mainstream media has chosen to solemnly ignore so as not to instigate widespread panic. The trigger event has already been activated, and the countdown has begun in the silence of institutional vaults. In February 2026, deliverable silver stocks on the main Western exchange suffered a frightening evaporation of liquidity, plummeting to critical levels not seen in over a decade. The illusion of security is crumbling beneath our feet now. To understand the magnitude of this death spiral, you need to confront the cold numbers that bureaucrats try to hide under the rug of opaque reports. In just the last few months, the silver in the category registered on COMEX, that available for immediate physical delivery, has plummeted abysmally by 75%, leaving only 88 million ounces in the system. We witnessed a true apocalypse in the stocks, a flight from vaults without absolutely any precedent in recent history. In an event of institutional panic that occurred a few months ago, more than 60% of the remaining registered silver, the equivalent of 47 million ounces, was brutally drained and claimed by major global players in an astonishing 4 days of trading. The physical basis of the system simply collapsed before our helpless eyes. What exacerbates this systemic trap scenario is the fact that we enter 2026 recording the 6th consecutive year of relentless structural deficit. There is a colossal accumulated shortage of 820 million ounces, driven by the gigantic energy industries and the voracity of new artificial intelligence. While the mainstream media keeps you completely distracted with perfectly superficial agendas, a silent arbitrage is actively draining wealth from the West towards the East. The Shanghai Stock Exchange trades the hard, physical metal at a monstrous premium, exceeding the Western price by more than 11 precious dollars. The smart producers have suddenly stopped sending their wealth directly to New York, accelerating an inevitable implosion of the entire underlying mechanism of world price formation. You are about to discover today the exact detailed anatomy of this brutal and imminent disaster that newspapers refuse to report. To understand the mechanics of this impending collapse, you need to swallow the red pill and see through the illusory architecture that underpins Western financial markets. We are not facing a natural speculative commodities boom, but rather witnessing a severe structural liquidity crisis in the derivatives market. The West built its precious metals pricing empire on paper foundations, using an incredibly fragile fractional reserve system. Imagine a huge luxury building erected on swampy land, where the foundation is silently rotting while the residents party on the upper floors. The security perceived by the general public is utterly false, a shadow play designed to maintain blind faith in failed institutions. The stealthy default of the New York and London stock exchanges has already begun, corroding the master gears of this immense global machine. The macabre financial engineering behind this catastrophic collapse is the hyper-leveraging of derivatives entirely based on blind trust. COMEX issues hundreds of millions of ounces of futures contracts daily under the arrogant assumption that almost all traders will accept settlement in fiat money. It functions exactly like a perverse game of musical chairs on a global scale, where for every real physical silver chair stored in the vault, there are multiple virtual owners holding paper certificates. The number of open contracts has reached a staggering 400% over the physical stock available at the beginning of this year. It's a pressure cooker about to explode, sustained only by the empty promise that not everyone will try to exit through the same narrow door simultaneously when the inevitable systemic panic finally takes hold on the big trading desks. This fragile mechanism of trust definitively broke down when heavy industry and mega investors realized the grotesque distortion of the Shanghai premium. The plumbing of the global financial system began to leak aggressively when the East, led by China and India, and the voracious advanced technology industries, demanded the delivery of the hard, physical metal. They looked to the West and realized that silver was being artificially subsidized, traded at an irrational discount to tangible reality. Why accept a piece of paper in New York when mining companies can rake in stratospheric premiums by sending the actual production directly to Asia? The flow of intelligent capital is operating like water, finding a crack in a dam, abandoning fictitious Western derivatives to feverishly seize the scarce raw material that sustains humanity's technological and industrial future. Mathematically, the New York Stock Exchange has been cornered in a veritable checkmate with no viable escape route to preserve its integrity. Think of perfectly aligned dominoes. The first one has already been pushed, and the weight of physics makes the chain reaction absolutely irreversible. If regulators stand idly by, allowing the free market to act and the race for physical deliveries to continue its natural course, the price of the metal will be ejected to stratospheric levels. The last stocks of the recorded category will be decimated in a matter of hours, and high-frequency trading algorithms will collapse, trying to price an asset that has simply ceased to exist on Western shelves. Allowing this dynamic of physical exhaustion to continue means signing the death certificate of American influence over the global tangible markets for monetary metals. On the other hand, the institutional alternative to contain this hemorrhage is even more destructive and constitutes the true core of this brutal systemic trap. The exchange may choose to draconianly and punitively increase the margins required to force leveraged traders to sell their paper contracts. In an extreme scenario, they will invoke the dreaded force majeure clause, forcing the liquidation of all contracts opened exclusively in inflated fiat dollars, refusing physical delivery. By pressing this panic button, they will demonstrate to the whole world that the emperor has no clothes and that the system does not possess the real asset it promised to safeguard. The clogged plumbing will finally burst, flooding the market with the certainty that Western screen prices were a large and elaborate fraud designed to suppress the true value of assets. What we are witnessing is the complete and irrefutable disintegration of COMEX's credibility as the main global price-setting entity in this century. The coffers are emptying at a dizzying speed in the face of a physical hemorrhage that traditional monetary tools are utterly incapable of stemming or even mitigating. The illusion of infinite liquidity has evaporated in the face of the inexorable gravity imposed by the physical demands of the new Eastern economy and the frenetic expansion of artificial intelligence. When the dust settles and the last paper contract is forcibly liquidated at arbitrary prices, the shock of reality will leave a trail of conventional investors completely ruined and devoid of tangible protection. You now understand the cold mechanics of this broken machine. In the next section, I will show exactly how history has already proven that this collapse is a script with a pre-written ending. If you still harbor any comforting doubt that the system can magically reverse this evaporation of liquidity, I invite you to look at the brutal scars left on our financial history. The systemic event we are dissecting today is not an unprecedented phenomenon, but rather the exact and terrifying mirror image of the catastrophic collapse of the London gold pool in 1968. In that dark period, the United States and European powers arrogantly attempted to manipulate and artificially suppress the price of gold, which was fixed at a mere $35 an ounce. Just as now, the illusion of control was maintained by the complacent headlines of the hegemonic media, while shrewd entities and insiders avidly bought the cheap physical metal behind the scenes. The plumbing clogged when the central bank coffers relentlessly dried up. Those who ignored these same identical signs lost absolutely everything. Moving forward to 1980, we witnessed the legendary Hunt Brothers squeeze in the silver market itself, a smaller-scale rehearsal for the global implosion we are facing now. The death spiral began when brutal physical demand violently collided with the fiction of paper contracts issued by American commodity exchanges. The official pattern adopted by the institutions in power is invariably the same and is repeating itself now before our perplexed eyes. It always begins with vehement and aggressive denial on the part of the financial authorities. They will smile on corporate news channels and assure the docile public that inventories are perfectly healthy, while secretly preparing the regulatory scaffold to protect their own dirty capital. The systemic trap has already been triggered, and the shock of reality will be merciless. The lethal script of this financial catastrophe methodically advances to the next phase, which is the sudden and brutal increase in margin requirements at derivatives brokerages. Both in the 60s and in the rampant bleeding of the 80s, the system reacted to its own bankruptcy by changing the rules of the game mid-match. This blatant manipulation invariably culminates in a massive forced liquidation, where the paper market bleeds to death and the tangible physical asset becomes completely dissociated from the fractional derivatives market. It is a colossal and relentless transfer of wealth designed to severely punish the naive who blindly trusted in the illusory security of the numbers flashing on a computer screen. The warnings are screaming from the control panel, and only the properly informed individuals will survive this structural purge. Global financial history is categorical and relentless in stating that the bloody and inevitable collapse of the paper contract price invariably precedes the dizzying explosion in the asset's value on the physical and black market. The obscure dynamics that annihilated generational fortunes in 1929 and decimated entire portfolios in 2008 share the very same perverse DNA as the crisis that today paralyzes COMEX's coffers. Their fear of instability is not irrational. It is the biological and logical response of those who have finally awakened to the undeniable reality that the system is fundamentally broken and insolvent. The premonitory signs that preceded the great economic disasters of the last century are all aligned simultaneously at this very historical moment. Those who continue to believe the official narrative of the mainstream media will become merely the next victims of financial statistics. Now, you might be wondering why governments, central banks, or giant financial corporations don't magically intervene to save the day as they have done in the past. The stark answer is that, this time, they have fallen into their own systemic trap and are cornered between a rock and a hard place. The crisis containment architecture they have used in recent decades relied exclusively on issuing debt and manipulating interest rates, tools utterly useless against a physical structural deficit. You can't print silver on government printers, and you can't solve the evaporation of tangible liquidity with appeasing speeches in the mainstream media. Any desperate attempt at intervention by the financial establishment will only act as gasoline on the fire, accelerating the inevitable collapse of this fragile institutional illusion. The global chessboard has shifted, and the checkmate is perfectly drawn against them. Consider coldly the first destructive option that central banks have in their depleted arsenal. If they decide to bail out the big banks operating overdrawn on COMEX by injecting trillions of fiat dollars to cover the monstrous losses from derivative contracts, the result will be catastrophic for the common people. This brutal injection of artificial liquidity will create rampant and uncontrollable inflation, instantly eroding the purchasing power of your wages and destroying your meager savings. The inflationary death spiral will transform the cost of living into a daily nightmare, while the media tries to blame fictitious external factors. By protecting the financial elite through currency devaluation, the government will push the unsuspecting citizen into utter ruin, validating the fears of those who have already understood the structural fraud. Saving the paper traders means cruelly sacrificing the real economy and working families. The second alternative available to the system is even more terrifying and represents the terminal collapse of institutional trust. If the exchange declares force majeure and forces the liquidation of silver contracts strictly in cash, without the delivery of the physical metal, it will be signing its own confession of insolvency. This despotic maneuver would immediately destroy COMEX's role as a price maker, triggering tyrannical capital controls and a global rush for tangible assets outside American jurisdiction. The clogged plumbing would burst, revealing that the promise of financial security was merely a very well-orchestrated illusion. When a government alters market laws to protect the losing elite and confiscate the legitimate gains of investors, the social contract completely disintegrates. Panic will no longer be just a remote hypothesis, but the new and brutal daily systemic reality. To severely worsen this impending implosion, the corporate behemoths of the West fatally underestimated the geopolitical and financial astuteness of the Deep East. The Shanghai Stock Exchange and Asian sovereigns do not operate under the same fog of speculative derivatives that blinds the trading desks on Wall Street. They demand the methodical and relentless delivery of real assets, inexorably draining what little legitimate silver remains in American and European fractional coffers. The West is trapped in a labyrinth of futures contracts impossible to settle honorably, while the East sucks up the physical resources needed to dominate the energy infrastructure and artificial intelligence of the next decade. Western governing powers are perfectly tied, watching a tectonic power transfer unfold without any real capacity for intervention that won't result in a lightning-fast economic suicide before the world's cameras and watchful markets. In short, the system is mathematically and physically broken, blindly and rapidly heading towards the abyss under the command of leaders intoxicated by their own academic arrogance. They cannot retreat, and they cannot advance without detonating the corrupt architecture that has enriched their caste for so many dark decades. The average citizen and the inattentive investor who entrusts their protection to traditional banks and the comforting narratives of corporate media will act only as the sacrificial lamb on this altar of insolvency. It is crucial that you accept this harsh reality now. No one will come to your rescue when the emergency doors are abruptly locked by cowardly regulators. You are entirely on your own at this precise and dangerous point of no return. Fortunately, for the awakened minority, there is a clear escape route. Below, I will detail the 3 precise tactical moves for your immediate protection. The time has come to abandon paralyzing despair and adopt the ruthless stance of a strategist in the face of inevitable liquidity evaporation. Your first asymmetrical survival move demands a brutal and purely tangible defense against the banking system's death spiral. You must immediately begin the surgical accumulation of physical silver, focusing strictly on bars and coins allocated entirely privately. This hard asset must be stored in absolute and impenetrable vaults, physically located beyond the predatory reach of jurisdictions vulnerable to state confiscations or COMEX corporate shutdowns. When the plumbing clogs and forced liquidation in fiat money is triggered, your real, tangible ounce in hand will be the only true immune guarantee. The illusion of paper will evaporate, leaving only those who hold real wealth intact and perfectly protected from impending ruin. The second tactic transcends mere survival and positions its capital directly at the forefront of the counterflow to profit from the systemic trap. This is the calculated attack, the aggressive acquisition of shares in the rare primary silver mining companies, specifically those based in Mexico and Latin America. The vital secret of this operation is to methodically hunt for producing companies that possess extreme commercial agility and do not fully hedge in New York. These companies are circumventing the Western implosion and selling their bullion directly on the Shanghai free market or through vigorous bilateral industrial agreements. They immediately profit from the stratospheric Eastern premium of over $11, exponentially multiplying their profit margins over Western fixed costs. It is the perfect wealth transfer, leveraging the structural failure of the American stock market to generate absolutely unparalleled and exponential returns. The third and final move demands Spartan discipline and the surgical severing of any remaining ties to the illusion of the fractional system. You must ruthlessly liquidate all your positions in paper index funds, the infamous derivative-backed ETFs, which promise security but deliver only counterparty risk. These financial instruments are the very essence of the fraud that underpins the bankrupt pricing of the West and will be the first to crumble in the inevitable implosion. Get rid of the synthetic garbage that the mainstream media pushes on to naive investors and redirect that capital exclusively to real, tangible assets. This is the decisive moment to separate the intelligent individual from the mass that will be swallowed by the structural collapse. The board has been reconfigured, and faithfully executing these 3 steps guarantees not only your protection, but your mastery over the impending chaos. The liquidity evaporation we are dissecting today is not a static event, passively awaiting your decision-making in the distant future. The collapse of COMEX stocks is progressing in real time this very month of March 2026, mercilessly devouring the last physical ounces while the mainstream media continues to anesthetize the public with empty and irrelevant narratives. The Western financial system has definitively entered a terminal death spiral, and the rules of the game are being rewritten in the shadowy backrooms of Shanghai and New York. To avoid being crushed by this historic implosion and the inevitable systemic trap that is approaching, you need a continuous, incorruptible source of intelligence absolutely focused on structural truth. Our job here is to act as your relentless financial sentinel against the bankrupt establishment. That's precisely the vital reason why I'm not here to beg for clicks or ask you to simply like this video to inflate the ego of some corporate algorithm. Subscribe to this channel right now to follow every development of this monstrous crisis in real time and receive defense tactics before the exit doors are locked. By joining our community of armored strategists, you guarantee your immediate and uninterrupted access to the densest and most urgent intelligence reports on the internet about geopolitics and real macroeconomics. We monitor the clogged plumbing of the fiduciary system so you won't be caught off guard when institutional panic finally overflows into the streets and ordinary brokerages. Stand alongside the rational individuals who have chosen painful, tangible truth over the comforting and fragile illusion of the conventional system. Our digital trench grows daily with awakened minds who have already understood that true value does not reside in floating digits flashing on a subsidized banking app screen. Every time an ounce of physical silver crosses the ocean towards the unforgiving vaults of East Asia, your savings based on fiat currency suffer a silent and irreversible erosion. We are meticulously documenting the largest transfer of tangible wealth in contemporary human history, and your subscription to this channel is the ultimate passport to operating on the winning side of this immense tectonic fracture. The architecture of lies and omissions designed by bureaucratic elites and central authorities will not silence the vital signals we relentlessly emit here every week. Be part of this continuous informational front line and shield your family's real assets from imminent financial devastation. To seal your commitment to tangible reality and expand our tactical debate, I urge you to go down to the comments section now and answer a direct and strictly personal question. Given this brutal evaporation of COMEX stocks in early 2026 and the imminent collapse of the dollar as an uncontested reserve currency, what exact percentage of your net worth have you already managed to convert into physical precious metals and store completely outside the traditional banking system? Have you already begun your strategic escape to tangible silver, or are you still paralyzed by fear, holding on to paper receipts and blindly trusting the false promises of liquidity from drying up Western institutions? Your honest answer will help us map the level of real preparedness and the degree of vulnerability of our own community in the face of the ultimate economic abyss. Carefully analyze the comments from your peers below and realize that you are not alone in this grim and rational reading of the current global macroeconomic scenario. The fear you feel at watching the system crack is completely valid, but paralysis in the face of this monumental systemic trap will be absolutely fatal to your hard-earned savings. The implosion clock continues to tick relentlessly as Eastern arbitrage drains the last drop of credibility from the ailing Western financial empire. Be prepared, position yourself out of reach of state clutches, and keep your mind sharp against the smokescreens fired daily by the cowardly hegemonic media. We will return very soon with the next asymmetric intelligence report, actively revealing the new obscure data that the stock markets are trying to erase. Stay lucid, always steadfast, strategically positioned in the physical world, and until our next critical broadcast.